This is World News Program coming to you live from Algiers. I'm your host Miriam Zian, and these are your headlines. In Yemen, the coalition carried out airstrikes on areas controlled by the Southern Transitional Council, while the National Shield Forces advanced toward Aden and seized strategic sites in the region. The Presidential Leadership Council announced the dismissal of Idrous Zbeidi from its membership. In Gaza, Zionist forces launched a series of airstrikes across various parts of the strip. The Ministry of Health warned of a severe shortage of laboratory supplies, saying the shortage threatens the continuity of medical care services. And in Libya, amid growing divisions over the Electoral Commission, the High Council of State called for respect of the principle of national ownership of the political process and reaffirmed the role of the UN mission amid the approval by Presidential Council of the National Charter for National Reconciliation. Welcome back to the details of your program. First, in our file, the Arab coalition carried out airstrikes on site in Dalah Governorate in southern Yemen, which is under the control of the Southern Transitional Council. For the first time since clashes escalated between the Southern Transitional Council and the coalition to support legitimacy. Yemeni media sources reported that the Arab coalition, led by Saudi Arabia, targeted at dawn on Wednesday a camp in the Zubayd area of Dalah, which is reportedly used to gather and train units loyal to the Southern Transitional Council. Saudi media reported that the Homeland Shield forces affiliated with Yemen's Presidential Leadership Council and are heading toward the city of Aden in southern Yemen. Meanwhile, media sources said the Giants brigades took control of strategic sites in the city, including the Mashiq Presidential Palace and the Central Bank, following the withdrawal of forces affiliated with the Southern Transitional Council from several checkpoints. Amrul Bid, a senior official in the Southern Transitional Council, said that the council's president, Idrous Zbeidi, decided not to travel to Riyadh to avoid creating a security vacuum in Aden, as he put it. These remarks come after reports circulated about Zbeidi fleeing to an unknown destination. Mohammed al-Ghaithi, a senior official in what is called the Yemeni Southern Transitional Council, said on Wednesday that he arrived in Saudi Arabia with a delegation and that talks on Yemen will begin after he had earlier announced a loss of contact with the delegation. In a post on X, al-Ghaithi indicated that a positive atmosphere has been recorded ahead of the start of a series of meetings within the anticipated dialogue sponsored by Saudi Arabia. Yemen's Ministry of Foreign Affairs confirmed that the first flight was operated on Wednesday to evacuate stranded foreign tourists from the island of Socotra. In a statement, the ministry said that 179 stuck individuals were transported from Socotra to Jeddah, adding that arrangements to evacuate the remaining tourists are ongoing in the coming hours, ensuring their safety and facilitating their return to their destinations. Moving on now to Syria, at least 4 civilians have been killed and 18 injured after attacks by the so-called SDF on residential neighborhoods. Authorities say hospitals remain on full alert as the injured receive medical care. Civil defense teams evacuated 850 residents from Al-Awarid and Az-Zuhur in Aleppo to safe shelters, following renewed clashes with the Syrian army. A full curfew has been imposed in conflict zones from 3 p.m. local time until further notice. And the Syrian government said the SDF's statement on Aleppo, particularly Sheikh Maqsoud and al-Sharafiyya, contains inaccuracies and contradicts the April 1, 2025 agreement. It stressed that the SDF has no military presence in the city and that responsibility for security and protecting residents rests solely with the Syrian state. Now turning to developments in occupied Palestine, Zionist warplanes launched a series of airstrikes at dawn on Wednesday, targeting various areas across the Gaza Strip. Media outlets citing local Palestinian sources reported that Zionist fighter jets carried out strikes on eastern Deir al-Balah and the eastern areas of Khan Yunis, while other raids targeted the eastern parts of Deir al-Balah. The Palestinian woman was killed on Wednesday after succumbing to wounds sustained from Israeli fire in Khan Yunis in the southern Gaza Strip. Media reports citing local Palestinian sources said that the young woman, Farah Muhammad Shaqfa, died from injuries she sustained several days ago in the Al-Iqlimi area of Al-Mawasi, west of Khan Yunis, in the southern part of the Strip. Gaza's Ministry of Health warned of a worsening humanitarian situation due to a severe shortage of laboratory supplies threatening medical services in hospitals. 75% of biochemistry testing materials, nearly 90% of blood testing and transfusion supplies are unavailable, halting essential diagnostic services, including tests for endocrine diseases, cancer, kidney transplants, and blood electrolytes. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees announced that it has laid off hundreds of employees in the Gaza Strip this week due to what it described as a severe financial crisis. UNRWA spokesperson Adnan Abu Hasna said on Wednesday that 571 local UNRWA employees currently outside Gaza were notified of the immediate termination of their contracts, attributing the decision to a severe financial crisis that has forced the agency to let go of hundreds of its staff in the Gaza Strip. The UN Human Rights Office warned Wednesday that Israel's discriminatory policies in the occupied West Bank are increasingly suffocating Palestinian rights, resembling a system of racial discrimination. Every aspect of Palestinian life is subject to the occupation's control and restrictions, the UN said.
There is a systematic asphyxiation of the rights of Palestinians in the West Bank, whether accessing water, school, rushing to hospital, visiting family or friends, harvesting olives. Every aspect of life for Palestinians in the West Bank is controlled and curtailed by Israel's discriminatory laws, policies, and practices. Israel is violating international law, requiring states to prohibit and eradicate racial segregation and apartheid. Every negative trend documented in the report has not only continued but accelerated. And every day that this is allowed to continue, the consequences worsen for Palestinians.
One Lebanese was killed and another wounded as a result of Israeli airstrikes on the Tyre district in southern Lebanon. Lebanon's national news agency reported on Wednesday that Israeli forces carried out an airstrike targeting a vehicle in the town of Jouaya in the Tyre district, killing one civilian and wounding another. The Lebanese presidency announced it welcomes any country willing to keep forces in the south after UNIFIL withdraws at the end of 2027. President Joseph Aoun told UN Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations Jean-Pierre Lacroix that Lebanon supports such a deployment under the agreed framework to assist the Lebanese army, whose troop numbers are set to increase in the coming weeks. On Wednesday, Iranian army commander Amir Hatami stated that Tehran considers that remarks by U.S. President and the so-called Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, regarding the ongoing protests are as a threat. Fars news agency quoted Hatami as saying that Iran views the escalation of hostile rhetoric against the Iranian nation as a threat and will not tolerate it continuing without a response. In Libya, the Libyan High Council of State called on the UN mission to continue its role as a neutral facilitator of dialogue, emphasizing respect for national ownership of the political process and impartiality toward all parties. In a Tuesday statement, the Council reaffirmed its commitment to completing electoral milestones within a consensual, constitutional, and legal framework that ensures the integrity of the process.
The Council calls on the United Nations mission to continue fulfilling its role as a neutral facilitator of dialogue, while emphasizing respect for the principle of national ownership of the political process and refraining from bias toward any party at the expense of another. This would help build trust and serve the objective of reaching a comprehensive Libyan-led solution. The High Council of State reaffirms its firm commitment to completing the electoral process within a consensual, constitutional, and legal framework that guarantees the integrity of the elections and acceptance of their results and prevents the reproduction of crises or the imposition of unsustainable solutions.
The Council expressed strong surprise at Tuesday's UN support mission statement on reshaping the High National Elections Commission Board, saying it contained inaccurate descriptions, suggesting the Council is responsible for the so-called political escalation.
The High Council of State expresses its deep surprise at the content of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya's statement issued today regarding the procedures related to the reconstitution of the Board of Directors of the High National Elections Commission and the inaccurate descriptions that suggest attributing responsibility to the High Council of State for what has been called political escalation. While the High Council of State affirms its respect for the role played by the UN mission in supporting the Libyan political process, it simultaneously emphasizes that the sovereign powers of the Libyan institutions, as organized under the Constitutional Declaration and its amendments, must not be bypassed or dealt with outside the established constitutional and legal frameworks.
And Libya's Presidential Council Chairman Mohammed al-Menfi approved the National Charter for National Reconciliation on Wednesday in the capital Tripoli in the presence of members of the High Council for Peace and National Reconciliation and representatives of accredited diplomatic missions in Libya. In his opening speech, al-Menfi said the charter represents the result of a sincere national effort and a collective will that believes Libya can only achieve stability and progress through reconciliation, dialogue, tolerance, and prioritizing the nation's interests above all else.
This charter represents the fruit of sincere national effort and a collective will that believes Libya can only achieve stability and progress through reconciliation, dialogue, tolerance, and prioritizing the nation's interest above all else.
In Sudan, the government confirmed that the rapid support forces are seeking to use all methods and violations against civilians in areas under their control in order to prolong the war. In statements to All 24 News on Wednesday, Sudan's Minister of State for Social Welfare, Salma Ishaq, said the rapid support forces are working to starve civilians and commit acts of sexual violence against them, adding that many civilians have been punished in various ways for rejecting the RSF's presence in Sudan.
أصلاً تعمل على إطالة أمد الصراع.
Their support to prolong the war, and also because it rejects ceasefires, meaning it's a militia that doesn't understand ceasefires, violates them, betrays, and is undisciplined. Its presence in Sudan and its occupation of cities will not bring any peace to Sudan, and it is completely unacceptable. It is punishing the people and communities now for rejecting the militia.
والمجتمعات على رفضهم للميليشيا.
The Sudan Doctors Network warned of a sharp deterioration in health conditions and a rapid spread of measles in Darfur, with over 3,000 cases recorded. Delays in vaccine delivery due to restrictions by the RSF have hindered the transfer of medical supplies, raising infection rates, particularly among children. The network held the forces fully responsible and called for immediate humanitarian corridors and safe unconditional access for medical and relief teams. The Zionist entity's attempt to penetrate Africa through its unilateral recognition of the so-called Republic of Somaliland has triggered a rare African consensus, firmly rejecting what is seen as efforts to fuel instability, support separatism, and secure a foothold on the continent. Marwa Belaiwer has more details.
Once again, the African Union is taking a firm stand against Zionist entities' efforts to gain a foothold on the continent, particularly in the strategically vital Horn of Africa.
Federal Republic of Somalia.
In an emergency high-level ministerial meeting, the African Union's Peace and Security Council issued an unequivocal rejection of Zionist entities' unilateral recognition of the so-called Republic of Somaliland, calling it a clear violation of Somalia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The AU warned the move poses a serious risk to regional stability in a region already burdened by chronic fragility and overlapping crises, stressing that the Horn of Africa was not chosen at random. The African Union also reiterated its firm opposition to Zionist entities' attempts to secure observer status within the bloc, efforts previously blocked by African states led by Algeria and South Africa, preventing what was described as infiltration of the African institutional space. Zionist entities' war on Gaza and acts of genocide were likewise condemned, with the AU reaffirming its solidarity with the Palestinian people amid continued aggression across the occupied territories. The African Union's position underscores a broader rejection of external and colonial-driven attempts to manufacture instability across Africa, from the Horn and Sudan to the Sahel and West Africa and down to the Great Lakes region, warning that the consequences would extend far beyond the Horn of Africa alone.
The National Authority for the Prevention and Combating of Crimes Related to Information and Communication Technologies issued a statement on Wednesday warning of subversive posts circulating on social media platforms by individuals residing abroad, particularly in Morocco, France, the United Kingdom, and Canada, and who are known for their hostility towards Algeria and its institutions, with the aim of inciting Algerian merchants to strike on Thursday, January 8, 2026, with the goal of destabilizing the country. And in other news, Russia's Ministry of Defense announced that its special forces have targeted and destroyed dozens of command centers for drones as well as shelters belonging to Ukrainian forces. Russia's state news agency reported, citing Ivan Bigma, head of the media center of Russia's West Group of Forces, that an electronic warfare station known as Bukovel, 38 drone control centers and 2 Starlink satellite communication stations were destroyed. The agency also quoted Vadim Astafyev, head of the media center of Russia's South Group of Forces, as saying that 40 shelters belonging to Ukrainian forces were also destroyed. And Kiev's leaders continue talks in Paris on Wednesday with U.S. envoys seeking a ceasefire with Russia after reaching the previous day a set of security guarantees for Ukraine alongside European partners. U.S. presidential envoy Steve Witkoff confirmed that Donald Trump strongly supports the security protocols aimed at deterring any future attacks on Ukraine, as he put it. The Kiev Allies Summit agreed to deploy a multinational force in Ukraine under U.S. supervision, though Washington has not signed. Europeans see it as binding security guarantees for Moscow, but Zelensky says territorial issues remain unresolved and the Kremlin rejects any Western presence. More details with Usama Ayed.
In Paris, where 35 countries of what is known as the Coalition of the Willing met, a declaration was issued containing security promises for Ukraine, but it lacks a decisive U.S. signature. The agreement stipulates the deployment of a multinational European force in Ukraine to monitor any potential ceasefire under U.S. supervision. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky describes the declaration as more than just words, but frankly admits that the territorial issue has not been fully resolved, yet negotiations must continue.
The details have been worked out in the system of other documents. It has been determined which countries are ready to take the lead in the elements, guaranteeing security on the ground, in the sky, at sea, and restoration. It has been determined how the forces will be managed and what levels the command there will be.
My name is Steve Witkoff. Hello, everybody.
However, the nature of this oversight and the extent of the American commitment remain unclear. Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff affirms that U.S. President's strong support for the security protocols, but Washington has not signed the declaration and the framework of its intelligence and logistical contribution is still undefined.
We think we're largely finished with security protocols, which are important so that the people of Ukraine know that when this ends, it ends forever. But we also think, critically, that we are very, very close to finishing up as robust a prosperity agreement as any country has ever seen coming out of conflicts like this.
Europe is divided. Italy refuses to send troops, and Germany stipulates that any deployment must be in neighboring NATO countries and not within Ukraine itself. In contrast, Moscow categorically rejects any Western military presence in Ukraine and clings to its demand: complete control over Donbass, including the areas still under Kyiv's control. The Paris Declaration is a document on paper, but the path to peace remains fraught with political and military obstacles, while Moscow continues to hold crucial keys.
The acting president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, affirmed that the Venezuelan people remain steadfast in their pursuit of peace and reject U.S. aggression and the detention of President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. In a press statement on Tuesday evening, Rodriguez said that her country is governed by the Venezuelan constitutional government and that no outsider are involved. She added that Caracas has shown the world its true character and has grown stronger and more spiritually resilient to face challenges, aggressions, and threats.
This is what President Maduro called the extraordinary challenge of 2026. Venezuela refuses to surrender. Venezuela is actively resistant. The Venezuelan people are noble people, peaceful people. They're forging their own path, and Venezuela has shown the world its true mettle, that we have grown stronger and that we have matured spiritually to face challenges, attacks, and all threats.
In the same context, on Tuesday, acting President Delcy Rodriguez declared a national mourning period for those killed during U.S. strikes on the country last Saturday.
From here, a message to our young martyrs who sacrificed their lives to defend our country. Young martyrs, I have decided to declare a 7-day period of mourning to honor and pay tribute to the young men and women who died, who sacrificed their lives, and who defended Venezuela and President Nicolás Maduro. This is our tribute to them. The images of their bodies have wounded my soul, but I know that they were martyred for the highest values of this republic.
The United States confirmed that it has a plan for Venezuela following the detention of President Nicolás Maduro, emphasizing that the actions taken were not improvised. After a meeting with lawmakers in Congress on Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters that the matter is not a spur-of-the-moment action. He highlighted that Washington has a plan for Caracas and that the meeting allowed discussion of many details regarding the planning of the next phase in Venezuela. U.S. President Donald Trump stated that Venezuela would deliver between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil subject to sanctions to the United States, following the removal and detention of Nicolas Maduro by U.S. forces earlier this week. Trump added in a social media post that the oil would be sold at market prices, and as President of the United States, he would control the proceeds to ensure they are used for the benefit of both the Venezuelan people and the United States. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that any U.S. attempt to sell Venezuelan oil under U.S. sanctions would constitute a violation of international law. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said that part of the oil was likely intended for China, emphasizing that cooperation between Beijing and Caracas takes place within the framework of fully sovereign bilateral relations protected under international law. China stressed the need to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests in Venezuela.
The United States has long imposed unilateral and illegal sanctions on Venezuela's oil sector and has recently used force against Venezuela, dealing a severe blow to the country's economic and social system and threatening the stability of global production and supply chains. This is a serious violation of international law and a grave infringement on Venezuela's sovereignty. It also severely undermines the rights of the Venezuelan people. I would like to reiterate that cooperation between China and Venezuela is cooperation between two sovereign states and is protected under international law and the laws of both countries.
The European allies, including France and Germany, confirmed that they are working closely to develop a response plan should the United States carry out its threats to take control of Greenland. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said the issue will be discussed in his meeting on Wednesday with the foreign ministers of Germany and Poland, emphasizing the desire to take coordinated action with European partners. In this context, Reuters reported, citing a German government source, that Berlin is working closely with other European countries and Denmark on the next steps regarding Greenland. That's the end of our program for tonight. Thank you for watching, your kind attention, and we'll see you tomorrow.